Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Moed Katan Yudalid. As we started yesterday, the third chapter of Moed Katan, we're going to get into laws of Avelut. This is the main place in the Gemara where laws of mourning practices appear. So today's stuff is sponsored by Sandria Atkin in loving memory of her grandmother, Rachel Bat Hari, on her 39th year at Tzeit. Okay, we'll go back to the beginning of the Mishnah and we'll start from there. Elu megalchim b'moed. We now have a list of all sorts of people that are allowed to shave on Chol HaMoed. Shave means shave, haircut, all of that. We don't yet know why one even can't do this on Chol HaMoed in a normal situation, but it's obvious and implied from the Mishnah that this is problematic in a normal circumstance. We'll have to see why that is. It's going to be the first question of the Gemara. So we're going to have two parallel cases. These are people who can shave and get haircuts, and these are people who can also do laundry on Chol HaMoed. So, and they're very similar lists. Haba Midinat Hayam, someone who came from abroad. Now, the question is, does this mean abroad? Remember, the center they were talking about was Israel. And when we say abroad, we mean from outside of Israel. Or do we mean just someone coming from far away? They were on some sort of a trip. And then we'll also have to get into what kind of trip were they on. So someone who comes from far away, Umi Beit HaShivya, or he was in captivity, she, or Hayotze Mi Beit HaSurim, they got out of jail. Ve'haminudeh shitiru lo chachamim, you were in need or you were excommunicated and the rabbis permitted you, they took off the excommunication. Bechen, mish nish'al lechacham v'utar, right from here we're going to get into, by the way, all sorts of laws of excommunication. Daf Mishalahen this week talks about that. And someone who nish'al lechacham v'utar, I swore I took a vow that I was never going to cut my hair. And then I went to the rabbis and said, listen, I can't handle it anymore. I want to get rid of my neder. They let me get rid of my neder. And then it happens to be Chol HaMoed. I'm allowed to do that. And the Nazir and the Mitzorah, when they go through their purification process, when they're finished with the days of Nizirut or the days of the leprosy, and they're ready to get out, one of the things they have to do before bringing their sacrifices is to shave their hair. So they would be able to do that if that happened on the holiday. And these are people who can wash their clothing. Right? You end up with a lot of dirty laundry. From, let's say, a while you have no clean clothes, you can do that. Again, captivity. You got out of jail. Who also, apparently, you see from here, can't wash clothes when you're excommunicated. I don't know exactly how that works. If you said you weren't going to launder your clothes or wear clean clothes, and then you got your neder removed. Okay, so that's the second category. Now we get to mitpachot hayadayim. Now we're going to talk not about people, although we'll get back to people who can launder, but garments or objects that can be laundered because you go through them a lot. They get very dirty. You need them often, right? Mitpachot hayadayim, hand towels, right? You think about on the holiday and your dish towels. If you don't have enough dish towels, you could easily go through them, right? More than once on Chol HaMoed and need to wash them. Mitpachot saparim. Okay, this is a strange one, and there's different commentaries, and they're all somewhat difficult to understand. Either it's the saparim or the hair cutters, right? So now whenever you get your hair cut, right, they put like a towel around your neck. So that gets very dirty, obviously. So you can do that. Now, what's the issue? Well, didn't we say really no one's getting haircuts? So why would they need a big supply of these? So either you say, well, it's the hair cutters who are doing the haircuts for all these people who got out of jail, who got out of captivity. I don't know how many really there were. So it's a bit of a question, right? How much do they need if they're just doing this for a small, unique category of people? Or you'd have to say, some people say it's not saparim, right? Notice there's no vowels. It could be sfarim. And then we're talking about Sifrei Torah covers. Now, I was thinking about the Sifrei Torah covers in my shul. We don't wash them very often, right? I can't even remember when we wash them. So, why you'd have to do this on Chol HaMoed would be another question, right? But apparently they claim, whoever says this is the opinion, Sifrei Torah covers get very dirty and dusty and they need cleaning all the time. So you can launder those. Okay, so either which way, that's a difficult category. Umitpachot asfag, the ones that absorb, this is basically towels for the bathhouse. So people would take showers, they would need towels for that. Now we go back to people. Hazavim, v'azavot, v'anidot, v'hayodot, v'chol ha'olot mitum'a l'tahara, harei elu mutarim. Azav, azava, we talked about these categories of people, right? They have some sort of discharge that causes them to get into this category of zav or zava, or a nida, women's menstruating, or a yoldot, after childbirth. When they go through their purification process when they're done, all these different kind of tum'ot, it says, right? They go in the mikvah. And it also says, you wash your clothes. It's part of the process, and your clothes become tamei also. So you're allowed to wash your clothes because your clothes were tamei because you were in nida, zava, whatever you were, and therefore you're allowed to. And now it comes and goes back to everything said in the Mishnah. Everyone else, though, is forbidden. It's funny, you would have thought they would start with it. Lo megalchim b'moed, but you could if this. But in the end, the Mishnah says it very clearly. Everyone else is forbidden to do this. So the Gemara starts off with that line. Ushar kol adam, my time asurim. Why is everybody else asurim? Why can't they? Kiditznan, as it says in the Mishnah, they're going to quote a Mishnah from Ta'anit that we already learned recently. Anshe Mishmar, and what they're going to do is they're going to bring an example from somewhere else where someone can't cut their hair. And from there, we're going to learn, or can't shave. From there, we're going to learn to our case and say whatever the reason is there would be the same reason here. Anshe Mishmar v'anshe ma'amad. Let's review. Mishmar are the Kohanim, had a rotation. Who would go to the temple and do the work? They would go from Sunday to from Shabbat to Shabbat. Right? They would start on Shabbat. They would end in the middle of the day on Shabbat. And Ma'amad were Jews, meaning Yisraelim, the people who aren't Kohanim and Leviim, who would pray that the sacrifices would be accepted, representatives of the community. So also a rotation. The week that you were in a Mishmar or in a Ma'amad, Asurim l'saper l'chabes. You can't cut your hair. You can't do laundry. Ubechamishi. And on Thursday, though, mutarim mipnei kvod Shabbat. There's one exception, which is on Thursdays, we allow you to do it because we want you to look nice on Shabbat. So the question is, why is it forbidden there? And then we'll take that answer and we'll say it's the same thing here. My timer, we don't want them to be, when you go to the temple, we want you basically to look presentable. We want you to look nice, right? There's a whole idea we've talked about, especially with the Kohen Gadol and all the gold in the temple. We want there to be this beautiful aura of, as close as we can get, let's say, to perfection. And we don't want people to start saying, oh, look at that disheveled Kohen. It's not nice. So because of that, we basically say, I'll give you an example, right? How many of you get a haircut right before Pesach? Because Sfirat HaOmer is starting, depending on when you hold Sfirat HaOmer. But let's assume you start at Pesach, or wherever you count Sfirat HaOmer, you know that I can't get a haircut, so you're going to get a haircut before. So that's the whole thing. If we tell you can't get a haircut now, right? I'm really known for pushing off getting a haircut. I just never make the time. But always before Pesach, I know, I won't be able to get it for the next month, so I better get a haircut now, even though maybe I normally would go 6 months without a haircut. But because, it's right then, I'll push it off till, I'll basically take care of it because I know it's forbidden. So because you won't be able to cut your hair that week, you'll make sure to get your hair cut the week before. Okay, so and then you'll come in very nice. So now they say, Amar Rabbi Chanan, Amar Rabbi Elazar, what's the reason there? We don't want them to look disheveled when they get to the temple. Hachanami, same thing here. We don't want people to come into the holiday looking disheveled. So we say no haircuts on Chol Hamoed so that you take care of it before. So the first part, I'm going to try to repeat at the end of each section to summarize what we did. So we had the Mishnah with all these people who are exceptions to a rule, but now we get to why is the rule the rule? It's because we want people to have taken care of. And then, by the way, it's the same thing for their clothes. We want your clothes to be freshly laundered for the holiday. Now we get a question of Rabbi Zera. We're going to have two versions of this question and the response of Abaye to his question, according to each version. By Rabbi Zera, Avdalo Aveda Erev HaRegel. Let's say I lost something. I don't know if this happens to you, but I could sometimes spend an hour looking for something that I can't find, right? And it makes you crazy. And all you do, you throw your house upside down, just trying to find this one item, right? And let's say that happens to Erev Chag, and you're looking for something, and you're looking all over the place. Now, because of that, what happens? Well, whatever you did then means you don't do it otherwise, right? You don't do what else you're supposed to do. So in this case, I was supposed to get a haircut, Erev Chag, so I could go into the Chag looking nice. But in the end, I spent my day looking for some lost item. Kevan de anis muta. Do we say, listen, it wasn't my fault. I could have gotten a haircut, but I couldn't because I lost something and I got distracted. Oh, Dilma, kevan de lo muchacha milta lo. Or do we say, yes, it's true. You lost something and you were busy looking for it. However, what's the issue? If I go get a haircut, haircuts are noticeable. So if I go get a haircut, or let's say I'm a man and I shave, okay? I shave on the regel. Everyone's going to see that I shaved. Now, They're going to see that, but they don't know that I was stuck on Erev Chag and I lost something and I couldn't find it, and that's why. So how can we start making a distinction, right? So that's the question. Can we say, yes, you were anus, you had no choice, it was beyond your control? Or do we say, well, it doesn't really matter if it was beyond your control, because the issue is, what is this going to look like to people? Now, why do we care what it looks like to people? Well, this is something we see is a big theme we talked about already. Chol Hamoed, because it's so unclear what's permitted, what's not. And this even isn't like it's malacha. This is just, we want to make sure you go into the regel looking nice, so we don't allow you to do it. It's not as clear-cut a prohibition. So if we let you do it, people will think that it's allowed, it's permitted. So we don't want you to do that. So the question is, where do we side on this? To which Abai says a very famous line. Am Rabbi, because it's relevant in many cases in halacha. Yomru kol asrikin asurin, srike baitos mutarin. Are you going to say that everyone else is srikin, which is matzah with a decorated matzah, okay, with like shapes on it? You know, some people make shapes. Have like Deborah Dixon, if anyone has noticed her parsha chalot, okay, very decorated, fancy chalot in fun shapes. But when it comes to matzah, it's a problem to do that because, okay, you can ask Deborah Dixon, how long does it take you to make those chalot, right? It's time consuming. If you do that with matzah, what will happen? They will leaven, and then you'll have a problem. So now, Baitus was known that he knew how to make matzot mitzuyarot, these decorated matzahs, very quickly. He could do it within 18 minutes, no problem. But what are we going to do, says Abai? We're going to say, no one can make srikin except for Baitus. We're going to allow his matzot mitzuyarot and say to everybody else, sorry, no, not for you. And this is basically one of the most basic fundamentals of the halachic system. You have to make rules. You have to make cutoff, clear guidelines. Otherwise, you're going to say, you can do this, someone else can't do it. That's going to cause major confusion. So yes, you were anus, but it doesn't mean now, if you were stuck abroad or if you were in jail, so everyone will know that's a clear distinction. But if it's not a clear distinction, then, you know, someone sees matzot mitzuyot b'shuk, they're not going to know that it was made by the Baitus family and that they were very careful. And they're going to say, oh, well, I can make these too. If he made them, I can make them, and then we'll have problems. So he says basically, no can do. By the way, we've seen this before. It comes up in Psachim, the Srike Baitus, which makes sense because it's in matzah. Vilit amech. So let's just remind us. We had a question of Rabbi Zera. If I lost something and I was anus, am I allowed to get a haircut on Chol Hamoed? Comes by and says, no way, no how. So Rabbi Zera says back to him, Vilit amech. But according to you, I'm going to show you a case where we do distinguish, even though presumably it's not really noticeable. According to you, if you have, we learned this already, if you have only one garment, you can wash it on Chol Hamoed, because what else are you going to wear? You can't wear the same garment for 7 days straight. So he says, Hatam Nami Yomru, your same claim could apply here as well. And yet we allow it, even though, right, we're going to allow you to do laundry, even though we won't allow me to do laundry. So I disagree with your whole premise. To which Abai answers, what are you talking about? It was said specifically about that halacha, about the laundry. Amar Bar Rav Ashi, ezoro mochiach halav. It's very obvious if you have only one garment. How would it be obvious? Because what do you wear when you wash that one garment? You're obviously wearing something that's atypical to wear. I'm specifically explaining it this way because there's at least 5 different interpretations what ezoro is, okay? Is it that you're wearing your overgarment only with a belt? And that ezor is usually something with a belt. So it has something to do with a belt, not exactly clear, but the main point is you're obviously wearing something different when you do your laundry. And therefore, while you're doing your laundry, people will notice, they'll see you wearing something different and they'll realize you're not wearing normal clothes because this must be the only garment you have. And therefore, it's very noticeable. Okay, so that's the first version of this whole conversation. And therefore, so Hatam Nami Yomru. Okay, so that's the end of that. And then, so again, Rabbi Zera asked, if you're anus, can you or not? Kam Abai said, we can't make any distinctions. Came Rabbi Zera and said, what about the laundry case? We make distinctions, so we can make distinctions here. To which Abai said, no. The laundry case is different because it's clear to everyone that this is all you have. And therefore, it seems to say, no, you can't, right? Even if you're anus, you can't do it because it's not noticeable. Rav Ashi matne, but Rav Ashi had a different version of this whole conversation. According to him, by Rabbi Zera, uman sha'avdalo aveda, not me personally, I lost something. but a craftsman loses something on Erev Chag, Erev Haregel. Mahu. Do we say, now, why would there be any difference? Well, kevan de umanhu muchachamilta. Now, if I'm in my house and I lose something and I'm looking all over for it, maybe I'll look a little bit on the street, but no one's really going to notice, not a lot of people. But if I'm a store owner and it's Erev Chag and everybody's in the stores getting things, and they come into my store and everyone's going to see me in the shuk looking around and trying to find, did you see my item? Did you see this? It becomes very known that I lost my lost item. So now do we distinguish, maybe an uman can be distinguished, a craftsman can be distinguished from a regular person because that person is very noticed on Erev Chag. So do we say, kevan de umanhu muchamilta? It is something obvious like the laundry case. Or is it not noticeable enough, right? This is a classic issue of where do you draw the line? What's very noticeable or not noticeable enough? And as usual, the answer is teku. We don't really know. We don't have an answer. In this case, there is no answer to the question, and we're left with the question. But however, it's obvious from here, the conclusion from the previous version, which is this would only be true for an uman where there's a question. But for sure, if it was an individual, no one would think that they could get a haircut on Chol HaMoed. So the conclusion about that case is the same according to each reading. It's just the question of, was the question about this or was the question about this other case? Mi Medinat Hayam. So the first two things we did today were, why is it forbidden to launder and get a haircut? Then we had this question, what if you were anus personally? Can we distinguish between you and other people? And the whole reason to even get started on that is because the Mishnah already distinguishes between people, right? The Mishnah already says there's certain situations where we'll allow it. So the question is, how far do you go with that? Now we get to this Medinat Hayam. And the Gemara immediately tells us that there's a machloket about this, and our Mishnah is only one opinion. Our Mishnah says if you came from abroad, you can wash your clothes, you can shave, haircut. Manita deloka Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah must not match Rabbi Yehuda. Tanya, it says in the following, Braita Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Habami Medinat Hayam lo yigalech, mipnei sheyatza shelo b'reshut. Someone who comes from abroad can't shave. Why? Because they came shelo b'reshut. They left, and as they went abroad without permission. It's a very strange language, without permission. We're going to see it coming up soon. What is exactly without permission? But already here, the commentators have a big disagreement. And this doesn't appear in the Gemara. It's a discussion between the Rishonim, which is, when we say shelo b'reshut, do we mean that, and we specifically talking about that you left Israel and you went abroad, and that was shelo b'reshut because you're not allowed to leave Israel. There's some people who never leave Israel. They say it's a sore to leave Israel. Sources that indicate that way. And therefore they say, look, you left Israel. It's your fault. Because of that, we're going to penalize you and not allow you to get a haircut when you get back. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. So again, against our Mishnah, which says it's okay. Some people say no, and then it would only apply, by the way, this machloket would only be if you left Israel specifically. Other people say, no, it's talking about going abroad, on any trip from any place, and you were far away, wherever you were. Shelo b'reshut means you didn't have permission from other people, maybe. It's a bit of a complicated term to explain. It could be just it was for pleasure. And therefore, what? We're going to allow you to shave on Chol HaMoed because you went for pleasure? Okay, and we'll see later that they define shelo b'reshut more as pleasure or something like that. So Amar Rav. Now Rav is going to basically say, in what case do Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis disagree? We're going to basically give 3 cases of a person traveling, 3 different reasons a person might travel. And in the end, Rav is going to say it's really only in one of the 3 that there's going to be a machlok. So Amar Rav, lashut, if you're going to wander around the world, you want to go on a trek, you want to see different places, divrei hakol asur. Nobody's going to permit you when you get back from that trek to go and shave on Chol HaMoed. No way, no how. And again, when I say shave, it means haircut, shave, all that. Yeah. Limizonot, if you went because you needed for work, well, then divrei hakol mutar. If you needed food, and that's why you went, because you had no food in your house and you needed a job, you couldn't get a job locally, you went abroad to travel, right? We all know this from many people in Israel, travel for business, then of course it's going to be permitted if you got back on Chol HaMoed. That was out of your control. But lo nechlaku ela laharvecha. Here's an interesting machloket. What if you went, you had enough money for food, but you wanted to make more money, right? Like many people want to make more money than just the food they're going to put on the table for tomorrow. So, mar midamile kilashut. It's a fabulous machloket, right? How do we view the issue of making extra money. Is it like total pleasure, or which is lashut, right? To wander, to just, do things for not for no good reason, but there is good reason to do it, but it's not something that's necessary. I would say, in other words, is it a luxury or is it a must, right? Is it a necessity? Luxury versus necessity. Where do you put making a profit? Okay, so that's the question. Is it like mizonot, like having food on the table, or is it like lashut, which is just to go for your own pleasure? So that's the machloket. The machloket, according to this, is only in one situation, which is in the case of harvacha. Now we're going to have a problem with this. And to put it very simply, okay, well, let's read the Braita. I'll put it simply, and then we'll go through in detail. The word lashut literally means to roam, but what it really means here is to roam, for pleasure purposes or for no specific purpose. Okay, again, we always go on trips for a purpose, right? You want to learn, there's always reasons. It's not just stam to roam for no reason, but what we mean is you're not going for a reason like making a living. Okay. We're going to bring a contradiction to Rava again. Rava said there's 3 possible scenarios of traveling, and only one of them is there a machloket. This source is going to show that they clearly have a machloket in 2 situations, and that's going to be the problem. Okay, so let's read it. Amar Rebbe, nir'im divrei Rabbi Yehuda kshiatza shelo bereshut, v'divrei chachamim kshiatza bereshut. The most simple way to say this, it'll get a little complicated, but the simple way to say it is like this. What Rebbe says is, I hold like Rabbi Yehuda over the rabbis when it comes to shelo bereshut, and I hold like the rabbis over Rabbi Yehuda who permit, right? Remember, they're more lenient in a case of reshut, when you left for a good reason. Okay, now we don't know what reshut and lo bereshut is, and we're going to, okay, but before we even get to this complicated part, which is not really so complicated, but it's very simply, according to Rebbe, there's a machloket in 2 cases, because he says, I hold like the rabbis over Rabbi Yehuda in this, and I hold like Rabbi Yehuda over the rabbis in that, which means they argue in 2 cases, and we just said they only argue in one situation. So we now have to define what does he mean by reshut and lo bereshut, and it can't possibly be, right, that they're both harvacha, which is the one case they disagree, because you can't hold like the rabbis in harvacha and like Rabbi Yehuda in harvacha, so we're going to be stuck. So that's what we're going to read now. My shelo bereshut, what is shelo bereshut when he says I'm going to hold like Rabbi Yehuda and be strict? If you're going to say it's to wander, but we already said that everybody agrees that it's forbidden. So he wouldn't have to say, I hold like Rabbi Yehuda over the rabbis, because even the rabbis agree. And elel mizonot, if I say it's mizonot, well, for sure it can't be that shelo bereshut, because everyone says it's permitted. And he wants to be strict like Rabbi Yehuda, but even Rabbi Yehuda doesn't forbid. Must be, he's talking about to make a living. So to make a living, to make extra money. If you want to go to make extra money, that we're going to say is like Rabbi Yehuda over the rabbis. And that would work so far with Rava, but what's the problem? Ema Seifa. You have to explain the next line though of Rebbe. Rebbe said, nir'im divrei chachamim kshiatza bereshut. So I hold like the rabbis when you left with permission. So now, my bereshut, what would that mean? Ilem ala mizonot. If you're going to say I hold like the rabbis when it comes to food, which would make sense, but hamar divrei kol mutar can't make sense, because you can't say I hold like the rabbis over Rabbi Yehuda. That implies that they disagree, and we already said they don't disagree. Ela laharvacha, if you say it's the case where they disagree according to Rava to make a profit, well then hamar nir'im divrei Rabbi Yehuda baha. He already said we already explained the first part, saying I hold like Rabbi Yehuda in harvacha in profits. I don't hold like the rabbis. So this doesn't make any sense according to Rava. And again, as I said before, the simple way to say this is just he says they disagree in 2. It's implied in Divrei Rebbe that they disagree in 2 cases, and Rava said they only disagree in 1. So this is impossible. So what the answer is, Hachikama. They reread Divrei Rebbe. They say, Nir'im divrei Rabbi Yehuda l'Rabanan k'shiyatza shelo bereshut, u'mayni hu l'shut, shafilu chachamim lo nechlek kolav ela l'harvacha, aval l'shut module. What does this mean? Instead of saying, I would hold like Rabbi Yehuda over the rabbis, what he's saying is, Nir'im, or I would hold like, right, Nir'im divrei Rabbi Yehuda l'Rabanan, not to me, it seems. Even the rabbis see Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in Yatzah Shelo Bereshut, meaning in a case where you went lashut, to just roam. Then even the rabbis, Shafilu Chachamim lo nechlekwa, the rabbis don't even disagree with him about this case. They only disagree about laharvacha, right, for profit, of lashut. But if it's just to roam, module. they would agree with him. And the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yehuda if you went with permission. And what would that case be? If you went for food. And then Rebbe's basically saying the exact same thing as Rabbah. And then he's not relating it all to the Harvacha case. He's relating to the two extremes. And what he's saying is Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the rabbis in this case, and the rabbis agree with Rabbi Yehuda in this case, which is exactly what Rabbah said. And then it fits perfectly. But you have to change a little bit of the simple reading because it sounded like Rabbi was saying, it seems to me, rather than, right, it seems to Rabbi Yehuda to hold like the rabbis, and the rabbis seem to agree with Rabbi Yehuda, and that's the way they read it in the end. Okay, so that was the next part, which was to take this Medinat Hayam, establish that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, then establish in what case do Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis disagree, right? Where our Mishnah versus the Braita about Rabbi Yehuda, in which case, Rabbah said only in one case, if you leave for profits, where do we put that? In what category? Which is an interesting question in of itself. And then we brought a question from Rabbi. We resolved this source, how Rabbah can read that source. Okay, next thing. Again, we're going to have two different versions of this sugya. So we're going to start with Shmuel saying something, and then we're going to have the mirror image where the source that we bring to question him in the first version is actually going to bring a source we bring to prove in the second version. And then we're going to reject the proof and we're going to answer the question in the first one. Right? We're going to basically have Shmuel, a question from a Braita, and then an answer. And then the second one, we're going to have Shmuel, a proof from a Braita, and then reject the proof, all for the same reasons. Okay, so let's read. Amar Shmuel, Katan hanolad b'moed mutar legaleach b'moed. If a child is born on the holiday, okay, not like my children who were born bald, basically, but if a child's born with a lot of hair and you need to cut their hair, you can cut it on Chol Hamoed because it bothers them, right? She'en lecha, this is a really interesting line. One can go start thinking about this, whether you believe this or not and what they're trying to say, but ein lecha beit asurin gadol mizeh. You have no bigger jail than the fetus being in the mother's womb and stuck in there and can't get out. Okay, it's a very interesting image that I would not have thought to conjure up in my head of a fetus inside a mother's womb as being in jail, but they're basically saying it's in the sense of our halacha, it's like being in jail where you absolutely can't get out until it's time to get out. I guess you can say it in that way. And it's an interesting comparison. Now, what do you see here? You can shave a baby, right? Or really, they don't mean shave, they mean cut his hair on the moed if he was born on the holiday. What do you infer from here then? But if the child was born before the holiday and you didn't cut their hair then, you can't cut it on the holiday. That's what's implied from Shmuel. So Mativ Rabbi Pinchas comes and asks, and it's a bit of a hard question to understand how you can argue with this, and we'll see that they do argue with this in the end, but he brings this as a question. He brings a Braita that says, all these people in our Mishnah and all the people listed in general that are permitted to shave on Chol Hamoed can also do the same if they're in Avelut, right? Avelut, we don't shave, we don't cut our hair for 30 days. Well, if you're allowed to do it there, you can also do it in Avelut. Now, what can one infer, comes from Rabbi Pinchas from that source, if everyone who's allowed to on Chol Hamoed is also allowed to on Avelut, anyone who's not allowed to, asur legalech b'moed, if you can't shave on the moed, asur legalech b'yamei avlo, then you can't shave when you're in Avel, which means if we're going to then include everyone who's forbidden to shave, we're going to include this newborn baby who was born, let's say, 2 days before the holiday, can't shave on the holiday, therefore also can't shave when he's in Avelut. Now, we're going to have a problem here because we turn to Amud Bet. Iyamart katan itle beplukta. If you're going to say it splits into a katan that can and a katan that can't, that means we have a category of a katan that can't get their hair cut. Nimtzeit avelut noheget bekatan. This basically means that there is a law of avelut in a katan, that there is such a thing as a katan who can be a mourner, and laws of mourning apply to this newborn baby, which is a crazy thought. And Hatanya, it says in a Braita, mikarin lekatan mipnei agmat nefesh. We tear kriya for a katan. Let's say you're a newborn baby and one of your parents dies, or a sibling or whatever it might be, right? Or a mother in childbirth. So you tear kriya on the baby's clothing. Why? So that the other people around feel sorry for the child, to kind of get people to feel sorry, but not because the child has any laws of avelut for the child itself. So you see here, the child doesn't have laws of avelut. Now, the difficult part to understand here is, again, Rabbi Pinchas started with whoever is allowed to shave or cut their hair, on the Moed is allowed to do it in Avelut. He inferred from there, anyone who can't on the Moed can't do it when they're in Avel. And then implies from there that means that anyone who can't means includes this child who can't, according to Shmuel, because there is a case where a child can't if the child was born before the holiday. That means you'd have to say a child can't cut their hair when they're in Avel. And that means that a child has Dinei Avelut, and we know that a child doesn't. So he uses that as his question on Shmuel. So, and that was all from an inference from the Braita. So comes Rav Ashi and basically knocks out his inference and says, who said you have to infer that from the Braita? Just because it says anyone who can shave on the Moed can also shave when they're a mourner doesn't mean you have to say anyone who can't, and then come to the conclusion that there's such a thing of Avelut and a Katan. So Amar Rav Ashi, Miktane ha'asurin, it doesn't say that part in the Braita. If you're forbidden, then you're forbidden also in Avelut. Dilma, yesh me'an asur v'yesh me'an mutar. No, it could be that of the people who can't, some are forbidden also when they're a mourner and some not. So basically, what we see here is a Katan does not have dinim of Avelut. Is your question, Adina? Katan does not have laws of Avelut other than Kriya, according to this. I don't know at what age we say din chinuch, and I didn't look that up, but certainly not a newborn baby, which makes sense. That was the first version of the sugi. So again, just to review the main parts. The first version was Shmuel said a Katan can get a haircut on the holiday, but only if they were born on the holiday. From there, we inferred not if they weren't born on the holiday. From that, Rabbi Pinchas asked his question from an inference in the Braita, and Rav Ashi just said you don't necessarily need to infer that. Ameimar, V'Tamer, Rav Shisha, Brid, Rav Idi, Matnehach. They had a different version of this sugi. In their version, Amar Shmuel, Katam mutar l'galchol b'moed, lo shna nolad b'moed, v'lo shna nolad mi'ikara. A baby can always get a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Doesn't matter if the baby was born a few days before or born on the holiday, either which way, which is right, the opposite of what Shmuel said the first time. So now we're going to say, oh, child's always allowed. There's no forbidden haircut for this child. In which case, what are we going to say? Amar Rav Pinchas af ananami tanina. Rabbi Pinchas is now going to bring proof for this from the Braita, from before. He's going to say, look, there's no Avelut. Right? There's no case where the Katan can't cut his hair on the Moed, which means there's no Isur Avelut, which is going to fit perfectly with this Braita. Because what does the Braita say? Again, this is just a repeat, but using it for the opposite purpose. Kol elu shamu mutar l'galech b'moed, mutar l'galech b'mei avlo. Right? Everyone who can shave on the Moed can shave when they're in Avel. Ha-asurin l'galech b'moed. Therefore, anyone who's forbidden to shave on the holiday, asurin l'galech b'mei avlo, which would mean that a Katan would theoretically be forbidden, but he's not because he never is forbidden to cut his hair. So therefore, Iyamar Katan Asul, if you said it was forbidden for the Katan to cut his hair, which is not what Shmuel said according to this version, Nimtzeit Avelut nohegeh b'Katan, then you would have to come to the conclusion that there is Avelut for a child. And Tanya, Mekarin l'Katan mipnei Gemara nefesh, and it says we only tear Kriya, there is no real din of Avelut. And therefore, you can prove from here that Shmuel must be right. To which I'm Rav Ashi to say you can't prove it from your Braita. Maybe you're right, but you can't prove it from there. Why not? Because miktane ha'asurin, the whole inference is not accurate. It doesn't say anyone who's forbidden is also forbidden on when they're in mourning. Dilma yesh me'an asul v'yesh me'an mutar. It only talks about those who are permitted, but those who are forbidden on Chol HaMoed, some of them, like the majority of them, can't do it when they're in mourning, but some, like a child, would be able to do it when they're in mourning because there is no such thing as mourning. Okay, so done with that section. What doesn't say here, by the way, I just want you to notice, because I see some questions, I'm not following them exactly in the chat, but the Katan they're referring to here is a real infant. I don't know where the border crosses between infant and a Katan that maybe does have something. So they're clearly talking about a newborn here, which might be different than a Katan who's a little bit older. So again, that has to be looked into. Okay, now we're going to end. Okay, so that was our next section. The next section is basically going to be 3 questions. Number 1, are there laws of Avelut on the holiday? We already know the answer is no. We'll see that inside. Why? Number 2, if you're excommunicated, are you excommunicated also? Do the laws apply throughout Yom Tov? Okay, or are they kind of, do we override them and basically say, well, for the purposes of the holiday, you can be with your family, okay? Or you can, not your family, but, whoever excommunicated you, you're allowed to be in there. All those laws don't apply. What if you're a leper? To the laws of leprosy, all the rules. Now, in leprosy, I'll already tell you that, and we won't see this inside, but the commentaries have a big disagreement about this question. When we say, does leprosy override the regel? does the regel override leprosy? Do we mean for the main laws, like you're supposed to be out of the 3 camps and you can come back in for the holiday and the main things? Or do we mean the rabbinic laws, like you're not supposed to wash your clothes and things that are minor? Like some people say, we're obviously not saying that you could come back into the camp in the middle of the holiday, but the question is, are the minor things going to be not applicable? Okay, and so there's a split among the commentaries. Are we even saying, is the question, maybe we can even get rid of the serious things about Mitzvah, the ones that are all written in the Torah, or do we mean only rabbinic things? So anyway, those are the 3 questions, and we're going to see what our answers are. We're going to have some answers, we're going to have some rejections of answers, etc. Avel eno noheg aveluto beregel. Okay, so there we have it. It's not even a question, really. Avel does not do avelut on the regel. How do we know this? It says you should be happy in your holiday, and avelut obviously doesn't make you happy. Now, but they don't exactly say that. And this, I want you to listen to Gefet this week. It's super interesting. It really talks about the in-depths of the sugya. There's a lot of interesting in-depths. I'll just I'll read the sugya and then I'll give you a little bit about what Rabbani El Shimoni deals with in Gefet this week. It'll be up on the site later today. The way it goes is like this. There's 2 options. Either you were an Avel before the holiday, or you became an Avel in the holiday. Either which way, the regel overrides it, but a little bit differently. If you were an Avel Me'ikara before the holiday, Ate Aseh de Rabin, V'dache Aseh de Yachid. The mitzvah Aseh V'samachta b'chagecha, which is a public mitzvah, it's for everybody, that's going to come and override your private mitzvah Aseh to do Avelut. Okay? And I'll get back to this line in one more minute. If you became an Avel on the Chag, where you can't say, right, that you had this Aseh v'Yachid and then it got overridden by this Aseh of Rabin, of communal. But if you became an Avel once you were already in the holiday, lo ate Aseh de Yachid v'dache Aseh de Rabin. You're already in the holiday. You already have a Samach Becharecha on you. Comes your Avelut, which wants to override it, but it's not strong enough to override it because it's only individual. Okay, so according to this, simple reading is, it's an issue of Rabin versus Yachid. There's something that the community is doing as a whole, and your individual thing can't conflict with that. Holidays are communal activities. You have to be part of that communal activity. And according to this reading, it seems to be saying that they're both obligations by Torah law. Samachta b'chagecha is clearly Torah law, and Avelut is Torah law. Well, that's a big debate. Is an Avel by Torah law or not? Where would we see this? The only really place where it says it in the Torah is when Aaron's sons die. There's a reference to the fact that maybe there's Avelut. Okay, some people say maybe it's only 1 day from the Torah, not 7 days. That's rabbinic. There's a whole debate about whether there's Avelut in the Torah. Rashi tries to prove it from a pasuk in Yirmiyahu that seems to imply that there were laws of Avelut in existence, so we can infer that there must have been in the time of the Torah. And some people try to say it's by Torah law, in which case we have this Aseh of Rabin, Aseh of Yachid. They're each equal in the sense they're both Torah, and just one is communal and one is individual, and that's what overrides. According to the second interpretation of commentaries, it's De'oraita Derabanan, okay, meaning an Aseh of Rabin, which is De'oraita, and as it's said in like shorthand. And it means Aseh Derabim of the Torah can't override an Aseh of an individual that's rabbinic. And then it's, like on the scale, obviously Torah is stronger than rabbinic, and that's why it's going to override. What Rabbani El Shimoni says at the end, and I'm sorry to ruin the punchline, but I want you to see her beautiful Ma'alach. She says this beautiful idea, which is, no one's telling you that you can't be sad on a holiday, right? Imagine a mourner. It's a terrible thing. You're in the holiday, you're supposed to be happy. The Torah is telling you, be happy, don't be sad. And that's why you have to do Samachta b'chagecha, and that's why you can't. But what she points out is that's not what the Sugya is telling you. The Sugya is telling you that there's a halachic reason. There's either it's Rabin versus Yachid, it's communal versus individual, or it's De'oraita versus Derabanan. It doesn't mean you can't be sad, and it doesn't mean that there's no validity to your feelings and all that. It doesn't mean you have to overcome that and feel very happy. It's just that technically there's something that's more strong. There's something stronger than that, but it's not the simple way we normally think about it. That's why I really like what you said, because it's a way of thinking out of the box about this. We normally think it's basically saying you have to be happy, and you can't be happy if you're sitting Shiva. So you don't sit Shiva, you are happy in your holiday, when you know full well you're going to be very upset all that holiday. You're not going to enjoy your holiday very much at all. So she basically says that's not what the Sugya is telling you, that we normally think, oh, you can't be sad. Anyway, you should listen because it's very interesting. And she does a better job than I do of explaining the whole depth of it. Okay, next. Now we move to the next category. Menude maushin hog niduyo beregel. If you're excommunicated, then are you allowed to, do you still keep the laws of Nidoi or are they overridden on the holiday? Amar Rav Yosef Tashmai says, let's learn from here. Danim dinei nefashot v'dinei makot v'dinei mamonot. On Chol HaMoed, courts are in session. They deal with capital punishments, they deal with monetary punishments, etc. Now, what's the connection? Well, ilot sayetina, if they rule and you don't listen to their ruling, misham tinale, you get excommunicated. So obviously, if we have judgments, then we're going to have psak din. We're going to have psak din, the final judgment. Then we might have people that don't listen, and then we're going to have to put them in nidui. So if we do that, then obviously we do that. In which case, we're going to say like this: if you got excommunicated 5 days before the holiday, and we're going to say, well, laws of excommunication don't apply. Well, how could you possibly say? How could you possibly say if I was in Nidoi, excommunicated before, the regal comes and overrides it, and yet, but on the regal, you could put someone in excommunication? That doesn't make any sense. So therefore, he proves from here, source about courts are in session, that means you can excommunicate. That means, obviously, if you were excommunicated before, your laws are going to still apply. Abaye wants to reject this. Maybe when it says the courts rule, the courts don't rule. They sit in session and they talk about judgments, but they don't give the final issuing of the law. And then there's no excommunication because the excommunication only comes at the end when you don't listen to the law. Because if you don't say that, now he brings his proof from here. If you don't say that, that means if you rule dinei nefashot, we know that once you give a ruling on capital punishment, you kill them immediately. You don't push it off. So if you were ruled definitively, then we're going to kill you on Yom Tov. That doesn't make any sense. You're going to cause the judges to not have Simchat Yom Tov. Why? Detanya. Rabbi Akiva Omer, minayin l'sanedrin shargu et hanefesh she'ein to'amim kol oto hayom. A Sanhedrin that kills someone is not allowed to eat that entire day. It's very interesting halacha. They can't eat, right? I think this idea of understanding the gravity of what they've done. Talmud Lomar lo tuchlu al adam. Learn it from this verse. It says, don't eat on the blood. It really means don't eat the blood, but what they learned to me, don't eat when you have blood on your hands, basically when you're killing someone, even though it's by law that you're killing them. So therefore, just like there, it must be. They can therefore the assumption is on the holiday, they can look into the judgment, but they can't rule. So therefore, you don't prove anything about excommunication from them. But Yosef says, I'm relate. You're going to, that's basically, you're going to have the whole ruling and then you're going to push off the judgment. They like to do the judgments right away because it's torturing someone in judgment. Can't do that. But you think about the Netanyahu case, how long it's been dragged out, right? You think about that idea about Ma'aneh Tadin. Okay. So what does he say you do? Really, they do judge. What about Simchat Yom Tov? So they come in the morning, they look into the judgment. And then they eat and drink all day. Obviously, not all day, they're in court. But they eat and drink during the day, they mean. They judge at the end of the day. That way they don't have Inui Adin, but they also got to eat. And then, okay, so they don't eat at night, but they've already eaten during the day. So they had Simchat Yom Tov. So that's Rav Yosef. But Abaye comes and says, I'm going to bring you a different proof. Amar Abaye, right? Which then means, again, laws of Nidoi are not suspended during Chol HaMoed. Amar Abaye, Tashma, let's learn from our Mishnah. It said, these people could shave on the Moed. That seems to imply an excommunicated person can shave, can get a haircut, which is not really true. We'll see in a second. That's not what the Mishnah says. But he quotes a little bit strangely. Amar Rava, Mikatani, shitiru chachamim. It doesn't say the rabbis permitted it. In other words, a menuda was permitted by the rabbis to cut his hair. No, definitely not. Hitiru lo chachamim katane. What does that mean? Azalu paise lebal dine va'ate kamei derabana v'sharula. We're only talking about a menuda who got his excommunication removed on Chol HaMoed. That's what we understood in the first place. Abaye didn't understand it that way. He thought it's saying the rabbis permitted a menuda to get his hair cut because he didn't get it when he was excommunicated. Now this holiday is allowed to because laws are suspended. No, that's not what it said. So therefore, you can't prove it from there. So in the end, we end up with Rav Yosef's answer, which is no, they're not suspended. Same thing we're going to have with Mitzvah. Mitzvah marshi and hagzarat tobaregel. Amar Abaye tashma. Let's learn from here. Again from our Mishnah. Abaye wants to derive it. Hanazir v'mitzvah mitumato l'tarato, which seems to imply habi me tumato nahig. It says when they go from tuma to tara, when they become pure, which sounds like when they're impure, all the laws apply. So they reject this and say, no, lo mebaya kamra. This could be a needless to say structure, meaning lo mebaya, you don't even need to say bimei tumato de lo nahig. Of course, laws of Torah don't apply when you're in your days of Tuma on the regel because it's a regel. But aval l'tarato, the chiddush is, the new halacha is, you might have thought that when it comes that passageway into tahara where you have to do the shaving, maybe we won't allow that on Chol Hamoed. Why not? Nigzor shem yisheh karbonotav. We're worried that you might say, you might be 2 weeks before the holiday and say, you know what, I'm going to the temple anyway. Why don't I just push off my sacrifices to then? I'll do my shaving right before on Chol Hamoed because I'm allowed to. Therefore, you might say, oh no, let's not allow him to shave on Chol Hamoed so that people who finish earlier will not push off their sacrifices and do it when anyway they're in the Beit HaMikdash for the holiday. And maybe that's the chiddush. So Yimei Tumah, of course, laws don't apply, but all the more, and you can cut your hair, but all the more so at the end, that's the chiddush that you might have thought they don't apply. And in the end, they say, no, you're right. It overrides. You are allowed to shave on the regel if it ended. So according to this, it would sound like maybe a Metzora, really the laws are overridden. But Rav is going to bring a different source. Amar Rav, Tashma, vehat tzarua. The pasuk talks about a leper, and it says, and the leper. Now, why does it say, and the leper? It could have just said the leper. The Vav comes lirabot Kohen Gadol, to teach you that a Kohen Gadol can be a leper also. All the laws of leprosy apply to a Kohen Gadol just like anyone else. Now, what does this prove to you? Ha Kohen Gadol, di kol hashana kula, kiregel lekule amadam. He's like a regel every day. Why? It's not. Kohen Gadol makriv onen be'eno ochel. If he's an onen, someone died, normally you can't do any mitzvot. He has to keep sacrificing sacrifices. Law, it's as if he's always in a regel because a regel overrides avelut, which means he never has laws of avelut, right? He's always like he's in a regel. That's saying the same thing, even though it's not exactly. And yet he can be a leper. So what do you see here? If you do like the transitive property, Kohen Gadol equals regel. And when you're regel, there's leprosy because Kohen Gadol can be a leper and all the laws of leprosy will apply. So therefore, Shema Mina, no, hey, tzarat to regel, Shema Mina. From here you derive tzarat, all the laws of leprosy. Again, we weren't sure which laws we were asking about in the first place. We were asking about all the laws or just the rabbinic ones, as I mentioned before. But the point is, it doesn't get overridden by the regel. So we had our answers to our 3 questions. Avel, regel overrides it. But menuda and tzarat doesn't override. But that will finish for today. And we'll get to Isur Tisporet for Avelut, where they get that from. Start with that tomorrow and other laws of Avelut. Have a good day, everyone.